So this God of judgment versus this God of love, like that's a difficult, interesting thing to talk about. What side is God on? Because we each have our own biases, right? You're like, so some of us are like, oh, God is just a God of love and second chances, and He's so loving towards us all. He's just showing us grace and mercy, so you don't have to worry about anything, right? And some of us are like, nope, God is harsh and judging, and and that kind of feeling ends up leaving us like, oh man, if I do something bad in this room here, then He's going to strike me down at some point, right? God's always shooting fireworks out of His fingertips. It all varies based on how we view things, how we view the world, how we view all this. And many times we each have verses to back up our views. Like, I think it's really interesting when you talk about a God of love that Moses and all these other prophets and all this stuff are often advocating, trying to calm God down. Like, God's like, I'm going to destroy these people. And Moses is like, hey, take it easy, big guy, take it easy. Like, don't you love these people? Aren't these your people? You said that you were going to watch over them. Like, they really go to bat for them. I mean, Abraham, he's like, if there's just 20 people righteous in that city, will you not save it? They really go to bat for people. And what's interesting is you see different things out in the world today. Like, you have people, you look at TV preachers and they're like, oh, you're living a life of sin. And because you're living this, we're all going to go to the bad place because of the terribleness of your life, right? Like, depending on who you are and which verses you choose, we often pick and choose them for our own reasons. We become the own judges. And by doing that, we kind of ascend ourselves to thrones, onto our own thrones of judgment that put out decrees saying, this person's in, this person's out. This person deserves it, this person doesn't. We do this all the time, don't we? Like, I think you see this the most when we're driving around in our cars. We sit down in our cars and trucks, and we sit on our thrones of righteous indignation and judgment as we pass by this buildings and homes and businesses, right? Because someone cuts us off, we're like, whoa! Like, why is there no justice in the world? And we cast down edicts with our singular finger, right? Like, why did this person do this or do that? They are awful. We get this righteous indignation inside of us behind the wheel, right? And we feel this sense of empowerment when something happens, like a speeder passes us, and then all of a sudden a state trooper grabs them. They're like, yes, justice has been done. You have been caught. But what happens when we get caught? What happens when someone sees us driving like a pile of garbage? Like, what happens then? We're like, no, like that terrible cop bringing injustice onto me, that person was terrible. I deserve to get off. It's a bad light. That's what it was. If the yellow was just a little bit longer, I wouldn't have gotten that ticket. The road speed limit is artificially low just to catch speeders, Like suddenly the shoe's on the other foot and we start crying, mercy, mercy. Because there are true atrocities out there. And many times we can cloud our judgment can become clouded for our own sense of power, right? When we know that there are tragedies and atrocities around us and we're just silent to it. Because we know that. Like, let's say if I was visiting Coley's school and all the teachers were inside and outside in the parking lot, there was like this big bully kid like pummeling this like smaller kid, and I get out of my car and I see it. I even make eye contact with him, and he's got like the singular tear running down his lips, and I just go back in. I'm like, well, God's a God of love, like over there. And the kid, I could just imagine that little kid's like, there is no justice in the world. Yeah, there's injustice in the world. And justice needs to be had. Like, I'd be a terrible person if I let that continue going. Like, this stuff is difficult. It's hard to talk about. Because Nineveh, if you remember, like, Nineveh is awful. They're skinning people alive. And it's almost like all these smaller nations, especially the nation of God's people at Israel, are like that little kid that's like, is there no justice in the world? And we see what Jonah does, and it makes sense what Jonah does. He knows how awful Nineveh is, and even though he has now asked for mercy for running from God, he wants to sit on his throne and judge Nineveh. He wants to watch the fireworks leave God's fingertips as he destroys them like he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Jonah has ascended to his own throne. And that's where this gets so sticky, is that oftentimes when we're looking at justice, we ascend ourselves to our own thrones, where we set ourselves up as in God's seat so we could be like God, knowing good and evil completely and casting judgments on all kinds of people, just like we do in our cars. We tend to make favors for our friends and we love to punish our enemies. We're like, well, that person upset me. It's like off with their head, right? But these people are just like, well, I like him, even though he may have done something worse. Like, I like him and he's on my side. Well, like, we don't need to do anything about that. Like, justice is a sticky issue. And what we end up seeing, and I think what we end up seeing in the book of Jonah, is that we desperately need a higher standard. We desperately need a higher standard in our lives, that we need to realize that we got to come off the throne. That we need that higher standard, and that is God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the God of the land and the sea. Because I think when we see that, we begin to have eyes that see injustice out there, but we also have eyes to see how we have created injustice. And that's what we deal with every Sunday here at church. We have that time of confession, and it's where we realize that we have caused real injustice in people's lives. That we have caused real hurt and pain, and that we may have tried to cover it up. We may have tried to make the Bible say what we want it to say so that it's not as bad. You know, we may have tried to put God on our side even though it's terrible injustice that we're doing. We come to our fundamentals and say, I have caused this. I have caused pain and I've caused hurt. And we confess it. And we say once again, because we need to remind ourselves on the regular, that there is someone on the throne, that there is that higher standard, and that he comes to me. And the beautiful thing that is in Jesus, we know that he forgives us.